Fresh dates are such a staple ingredient in baking, and I know you're going to love my recipe for my Medjool date and chocolate layer cake. This is something special. Now, quite often you think about dates in date squares or simple preparations. I love the moisture that it lends to this chocolate cake. So first, I'll start by soaking my dates. I'll start by weighing out my Medjool dates. So it's 1.5 cups or 220 grams. And these dates already come pitted, so they're easy to use. But the nice thing about a Medjool date is they're easy to pit. All you do is slice it lengthwise, and then the pit comes out so easily. You don't have to chop them before you soak them. But these fresh dates really give this cake moisture, a caramel flavor, and this cake stays fresh for days. I need about half a date there. 220, excellent. I'll also add 2 ounces of dark baking chocolate. And I also add a teaspoon of baking soda. This helps the dates to really soften up when I pour the boiling water over them. I've got my water already boiled, and I need 1 2/3 cups. You just pour it right on top of the dates. I'll give that just a little stir, just to make sure the water gets down there. And now I want to let this sit until the water cools to just about room temperature. Now that my water has cooled and I know my Medjool dates are nice and soft, and the chocolate will have dissolved into the water. So now it's time to puree this. You can use a food processor or an immersion blender. I'll set this aside, and now I can get started on the base for the cake batter. The nice thing about making a cake recipe using dates is because of their moisture, you actually need less fat in your recipe. So this 2-layer chocolate cake only calls for 1/4 cup of butter in the batter. Now I'll add my light brown sugar. The combination of the brown sugar plus the caramel notes of the Medjool dates really makes this a rich tasting cake without being too heavy or overwhelming. Now I'll add my 2 eggs. Now I'll add my Medjool date mixture all at once. Another great thing about this cake recipe, it's a 1-bowl wonder. I'm going to place my sifter right on top and sift in my dry ingredients. First, my flour, and I use Dutch processed cocoa powder. Now, Dutch processed cocoa powder has gone through an alkalizing treatment. It reduces its acidity, which intensifies its color, it brings up its flavor, and it is actually my favorite cocoa powder to bake with. But it also gives me control when I add my baking powder. This cake bakes up nice and level, so you won't get a dome to the top of your cake. A teaspoon of baking powder, a little bit of salt, and then what I love to add to this cake recipe, and a nod to the fact that I was very close to the border to Mexico when I visited the Medjool date farm, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon, but definitely not that much cayenne. You can add just a pinch if you want, or up to 1/2 teaspoon. It just adds a nice bit of a warm kick, and the smell of the cinnamon combined with the chocolate and then that caramel date flavor, ooh, so good. All you need to do now is whisk until the batter is smooth. Because of the pureed Medjool dates, you will find the batter has a bit of a texture to it, but it shouldn't be lumpy. I've prepped my 8-inch pans by greasing them and lining the bottom with parchment paper. But you don't have to dust the sides with flour or anything. And divide the batter between the 2 pans. You want to give your pans a little tap, just in case there are any large air bubbles. And now these are ready for the oven. I've preheated it to 350 Fahrenheit, and they take about 30 to 35 minutes to bake. You test the doneness by inserting a skewer in the center. When it comes out clean of any liquid, maybe a crumb or two, then you know you're good. Here are those gorgeous cake layers out of the pan and completely cooled. Now, if you wanted to, you could make these cakes ahead of time and freeze them. Just thaw them in the fridge overnight before you're ready to frost your cake. Oh, and you can see by that intense color, you know that chocolate flavor is gonna come through. You can even smell the cinnamon when the cake is baking. But really, I love that caramel note that the fresh dates add to this recipe. And the moisture, oh, phenomenal. This is definitely not a crumbly cake. So let me just move these out of the way and let's make the cream cheese frosting. Because of the natural sweetness of the Medjool dates in the chocolate cake itself, I wanted a lighter frosting with a bit of a tang. And so this is a classic cream cheese frosting, but with a twist. Well, you know, I've been making cream cheese frosting the same way for, dare I say, decades, where I beat the butter and cream cheese together and I add the icing sugar. And if it's a hot, humid day or if my cream cheese is really soft, sometimes I have to add more icing sugar. And then that icing sugar kind of dissolves and I have to add more icing sugar, and then I end up with a frosting that is too sweet. Well, I've learned why that was happening, and it's because cream cheese is of course much lower in fat than butter. It's got a water content, so it was dissolving the icing sugar. The fix? Beat your butter and your icing sugar together first, then you add your cream cheese afterwards. This way, I add half the amount of icing sugar that I normally need to. Amazing! Right? So I've got my 90 grams or 6 tablespoons of softened butter, and it is unsalted butter. And I'll add to that just 1 cup of icing sugar. That's all this recipe takes. So now that my butter and icing sugar have had a chance to whip up, I can add my cream cheese. Now that my cream cheese has worked in, I'll add my vanilla and then let it whip for, in total, about 3 minutes. That way it's nice and fluffy and has some good structure. That way you can pipe it. There we go. I now have my fluffy cream cheese frosting. It's up to you if you want to spread the frosting on the cake. I'm going to pipe it onto the cake. I've got a piping bag fitted with a large plain tip. I like to put the same amount of cream cheese frosting inside the cake as I do on top, but I'm leaving the sides open. That way you can really appreciate the simple piping. And now you want to pop this in the fridge to chill. An hour or 2 is really all it needs to set the frosting. That way you'll get nice clean slices. There you go. Once your cake's had a chance to chill, well, it's ready to slice. This would even suit a few birthday candles, wouldn't it? Medjool dates are the secret ingredient to this delicious chocolate cake recipe. These pureed Medjool dates really give the cake batter a nice texture and some substance. I can actually smell the cinnamon, but this is just such a deliciously moist, intensely chocolatey cake with the cream cheese frosting, but at the heart, oh, those soft, delicious, caramel-tasting Medjool dates. That's the secret behind this chocolate layer cake that I know you're going to want to make. It's fancy enough for a special occasion, but easy enough to make for a weeknight treat. I really do hope you give this recipe a try and join me again for another Food Travel Diary.